Um, Dear participants, students, teachers, research scholars, all the people who are attending this one-day international conference on Beyond Binaries, exploring intersectional identities. Uh, Really happy and delighted to be here on this, uh, platform and until yesterday, I was not part of this conference, and it is a, serendipitous moment for me because for some reason, one of your resource person couldn't make it to the conference, and late yesterday, I got this invitation to meet you, to talk to you uh, on this idea of moving or crossing beyond binaries. So, I think I shall introduce my my topic to you, what I want to discuss with you. Um, I don't know when I am expected to end the session. I see that the session has started like 30 minutes late. Do let me know when I have to wind it up. For the time being, I go ahead with my session, and my lecture is titled Romance Beyond Binaries, Liberating Ghosts of Intersectional Identities. The topic for this lecture, it is titled Romance Beyond Binaries, Liberating Ghosts of Intersectional Identities. Now you might wonder, why am I talking about romance and ghosts when we are talking about something very strictly literary, something that is at the core of post-structuralist literary enterprise. What I want to communicate through this title, through this lecture, is basically the idea of what happens when we move beyond binaries. Is it a comfortable situation? Is it a commonplace thing that people move beyond binaries? When we live in a college hostel, for example, we are not allowed to move beyond boundaries. But what about moving beyond binaries? What are binaries and how do binaries limit us? And what does this conference intend to achieve by moving beyond binaries, or exhorting the participants, the world, the literary community to explore the intersectional identities by moving beyond binaries? My dear friends, when I talk about this idea of romance beyond binaries, I'm not talking about falling in love with someone beyond binaries. The phrase romance beyond binaries means a tender yet radical desire, a longing, a yearning to love what cannot be named, to desire what has been disallowed. So when you feel a desire to embrace, to come in close contact with, to love something that is not allowed, something that is unnamed, that is romancing beyond binaries. Those of you who are familiar with queer narratives would know what I am trying to tell you. Romancing beyond binaries hints at transgressing, moving beyond heteronormative, racial, caste related, ability related, and gendered oppositions. What are these binaries we are talking about? I use the word heteronormative. So, heteronormative, what we call straight. When Derrida spoke about binaries like male versus female, east slash west, black slash white, the sane slash the insane, the self versus the other, all these binaries work within a certain system. But romancing beyond my binaries disrupt the binary logic that underpins all of Western metaphysics. And the metrics of intelligibility even. And if you look at it, romance itself is often scripted beyond, within heteronormativity. For example, a man is usually expected to fall in love with a woman. A girl is expected usually to fall in love with a boy. Scripted. This is a script, and we are expected to follow this script. But then we have a world where we have people who move or who live, who exist, who are beyond this heteronormative framework. We have it is a queer, borderless, defiant force that undoes compulsory coherence to these established conventions. You can if you're interested in thinking about romancing beyond binaries, by moving beyond these binaries, you can think about Judith Butler and her idea of gender trouble, where she speaks about how romancing beyond binaries is necessary when we are talking about gay, lesbian, and such people, so such situations. And to explain this idea of romance beyond binaries, let me introduce to you a person whose work preceded the idea of intersectionality that you are talking today. This conference is about intersectionality, but there was a lady who spoke about something uh, very similar to intersectionality or intersectional identities before the idea of intersectionality became famous. This lady is Gloria Anzaldua. Gloria Anzaldua. I don't know how many of you are familiar with her, but it's very interesting reading her. She is someone who romanced beyond binaries, even within her own life. How? If you look at her ethnicity, she is a Chicana, a Mexican American, a person who moves beyond certain borders. She is an American, she's a Mexican as well. And if you look at her identity, she's a woman, she's a lesbian, she's a feminist, she hails from the working class, and she calls herself a mestiza. Mestiza. I will explain to you what a mestiza is, but in for beginners, mestiza literally means a mixed woman in Spanish. It's a Spanish word for a woman who is of mixed origins. A mestiza, M-E-S-T-I-Z-A. So this woman, Gloria Anzaldua, has multiple identities as a lesbian, as a woman, as a feminist, as a working class, as a mestiza. And look at her professions. She's a writer, she's a cultural theorist, she's a teacher, she's a spiritual thinker, she's a literary theorist. So many things, so many roles, moving beyond certain binaries, certain margins, moving beyond certain ways of having your identity. In other words, becoming intersectional. Becoming intersectional. All of us have studied this idea of intersection when we studied mathematics in our schools. Intersection, a point where two lines meet, that is the intersection. And when we studied Oedipus Rex, Sophocles' drama Oedipus Rex, we heard that Oedipus killed Laius, his father, at the intersection of two roads. You can call it a junction. You can call it a point where things meet. Parallel lines never meet. There is no intersection for parallel lines. Mathematics. We are not interested in mathematics. I will come back to this lady Gloria Anzaldua. She has written a beautiful work titled Borderlands. Borderlands. And it has a subtitle, The New Mestiza. M-E-S-T-I-Z-A. Borderlands, the New Mestiza. This work was published in 1987. And in this work, Gloria Anzaldua introduced a groundbreaking, path-breaking, theoretical and philosophical idea known as Mestiza consciousness. Mestiza consciousness. I love this word mestiza, the way it sounds even. Mestiza, the mestiza consciousness. So, what is a mestiza consciousness? In mestiza consciousness, human identity is understood as a site of negotiation and becoming. In other words, a person's identity. You are sitting there attending this lecture. You are in the auditorium. Some of you are attending online, some attending offline. You all think that you have an identity. But how much is our identity fixed? Gloria Anzaldua argues that our identity is never stable. She says that our identity is always in a state of flux. Just as Derrida said, meaning is always unstable, always in a state of flux, Gloria Anzaldua says that our identities are never stable. Our identity is always in a state of flux. And it is this awareness and worldview that arises in a person. So when will a person's identity become unstable? When that person exists in multiple, often contradictory, conflicting cultures or identities simultaneously. Simultaneously, when you have multiple identities, then you are in a state of flux. I'm sure the inaugural lecture by Dr. Rufus would have definitely introduced you and give you a detailed idea of what this idea of intersectionality can imply. So I'm not going into the details. I go ahead with the assumption that you are familiar with the idea of intersectionality. So Gloria Anzaldua speaks about it in terms of what she calls metaphorically as living on the borderlands. You know, there is a border, there is a line of control between India and Pakistan. And we saw what happened when there was this recent conflict between India and Pakistan. Living on the borderlands is fraught with a lot of dangers. You are always in an unstable state. The moment a missile is fired, the moment a flight crosses the air, whatever thing, there is a chance of war, and you are always under threat. So, living in or living on borderlands is an extremely dangerous, risky affair. And, by defining this mestiza consciousness, Gloria Anzaldua was talking especially, exactly, exclusively about the state of mind which which comes into being when you have multiple identities, when your identities are intersectional, when your identity is intersectional. And I had explained to you what the word mestiza means in Spanish. It means a mixed woman. And the mestiza just doesn't mean that your father is from one race and your mother is from one race, not just mixed race, but of mixed cultural, linguistic, spiritual, gendered, intellectual identities. Any type of identity you may possess, when it becomes intersectional, you are living on the borderlands. You have something known as the mestiza consciousness. The person who has a mestiza consciousness learns to be comfortable with contradictions. She learns to be comfortable with ambiguity. She learns to be happy with fragmentation. So it doesn't mean that it is all tragic living on the borderlands. For a person with Mestiza consciousness, it is something that she or he, makes his or her own and is happy with. So it is a process of learning where you learn to be comfortable and happy and accustomed with the contradictions and ambiguity and the fragmentation and the paradoxes that underlie your identity. This consciousness, Mestiza consciousness, does not seek plural, does not seek purity or singularity. No, it is not like, okay, my desire is to become, singular. I want to have a singular identity. I don't like this intersectional identity. No, the person with a Mestiza consciousness loves this multiple identity. He or she embraces plurality and liminality. And the Mestiza lives in between, like a ghost, probably, you know, between life and death, or between death and afterlife, neither here nor there, a blind spot, a kind of, your life has left your body, but you haven't reached the afterlife, neither here nor there, in no man's land, as Edward Said would talk about it, in no man's land. That is the title of his book, In No Man's Land. The Mestiza lives in between, physically, spiritually, intellectually, in all different ways. The person lives in between nations, in between genders, in between languages and ideologies. And that is why Mestiza consciousness involves a crossing of internal borders and a reimagining, re-understanding of one's own identity as a fluid process, not as a fixed essence. So I cannot say that my identity is a complete, fixed, concrete thing. No, it is a process. It is something that keeps on changing all the time. Like Homi Papa's third space. When you talk about hybridity, you talk about Papa and his idea of the third space. The Mestiza occupies a hybrid space that resists colonial binaries and dominant narratives. And this Mestiza consciousness offers a philosophy of survival, resistance. It is not just about survival and resistance. I would say Mestiza consciousness is even creative, in the sense a person who has an intersectional identity, a person who has this Mestiza consciousness becomes super creative. For those who live at a cultural, social, or psychic crossroads, it's not merely about enduring fragmentation, it is also about using your fragmentation as a source of power, insight, and healing. This is the theory that I wanted to communicate with you. Now let me try to explain a little bit about why I am talking about ghosts. The second part of my title is Liberating the Ghosts of Intersectional Identities. So who are these ghosts? By talking about ghosts, I am referring to Jacques Derrida's idea of hauntology. Hauntology, hauntology. Here Derrida talks about the ghost. What is the speciality of a ghost? The ghost is that which is neither present nor absent. Does the ghost exist? The ghost neither exists nor not exists. It is neither present nor absent, neither dead nor alive. The ghost is a liminal figure that troubles the linearities of time. You don't know in which time the ghost exists. Is it in the present, or is it in the past, or is it in the future? Where does the ghost exist? In which time? In which point of history can you situate a ghost? And what is the identity of a ghost? Think about it and you find that it is a very complicated situation. What kind of identity does a ghost have? Is it an intersectional identity? Of course, the ghost exists in an intersectional space, which is between life and death, between death and afterlife, and so on, between presence and absence, so on. So, hauntology is an act of political and ontological justice, giving voice to the unheard, the disqualified, and the spectral subjects. What are spectre? You might have heard of the specters of Marx and other ideas that Derrida spoke about. Spectre is another word for ghost. So the spectral subjects of history and discourse. For example, we have heard what would have happened had Shakespeare had a sister, if Shakespeare had a sister. So what is that idea? We are trying to say that women writers in history have been systematically removed from the mainstream. That is why we don't hear about those women writers. So in that sense, you can say in literary history, the female writers are spectral subjects. Their identity is neither something that exists nor something that non-exists. It is neither present nor absent, neither dead nor alive. In history, in literary discourse, if you talk about things in psychoanalytical terms, ghosts are traces of unresolved psychic conflicts. What are the conflicts? So within the context of intersectional identities, ghosts become the residues, the affective residues of intersectionalities discontents. What am I saying? Sorry for talking about a lot of complicated ideas. Let me keep it simple. When a person starts having an intersectional identity, suppose I have a very clear identity. Now my identity gets complicated when, say for example, I go to another country. My my identity gets a little complicated. Now what happens is I try to adapt to this new identity, this intersectional identity. Now what happens is, the more I manage to adapt to it, there will be residues. Waste will be produced waste will be produced And what kind of waste? Affective residue. Affective. Now you might think what this word affective is. Affective is not effective. Affective is not affectionate also. It is a word between being effective and being affectionate. Affective could mean something. I was recently having a discussion with a friend on the idea of being affective. How can somebody be affective? Affective can mean based on emotions. You must have heard the two type of fallacies that Vincent and Beardsley spoke about: the affective fallacy and the intentional fallacy. Affect based on emotions. So basically, in this lecture, we are trying to figure out how to manage waste. How to manage waste when intersectional identities are born. The waste produced in the process of becoming intersectional. What is that kind of waste? What is this? What am I talking about? My dear friends, intersectionality, the idea introduced by Crenshaw, exposes how multiple markers of identity, whether it is race or gender or sexuality or class or disability or caste or religion, interlock, come in contact with each other to produce complex and layered oppositions. Now, I am not interested in liberating intersectional identities from a theoretical perspective or from a sociological perspective. That is not my idea. My idea is to reimagine the self. How can we reimagine the self, our own identity, as a ghost, or as a ghosted, haunted, desiring, wounded, and unfinished narrative? You must have, heard or seen the movie Hamari Adhuri Kahani. Hamari Adhuri Kahani can be translated as our incomplete story. Our incomplete story. Now, I am talking about this when I want to talk about how we can use intersectionality in a literary way, in a poetic way, by talking about Hamari Adhuri Kahani, our incomplete story. For those who are not familiar, it is a 2015 Hindi movie directed by Mohit Suri. And in that movie, you have a deeply evocative song sung by Arijit Singh. Again, that song begins Hamari Adhuri Kahani, our incomplete story. My dear friends, what is this incomplete story? All of us have gone through incomplete stories in our life. It could be a friendship that broke midway. It could be a love affair that couldn't blossom. It could be a school we began going to, but we had to leave midway because our parents got a transfer. We all have incomplete stories. Hamari Adhuri Kahani. The film and the song explore the pain of unfulfilled love, emotional loss, and the haunting beauty of what remains unsaid, the sweetness of unheard melodies. Hamari Adhuri Kahani. And this Adhuri Kahani, this incomplete story, is a metaphor for relationships interrupted by fate, by responsibility, by tragedy. It is a timeless literary theme. We have seen this theme in Romeo and Juliet. The ill fated, star-crossed lovers who could not consummate their love, Romeo and Juliet, or go wider, Laila and Majnu in Persian Arabic folklore, or think of Heathcliff and Catherine in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Think of Jay Gatsby and Mrs. Wilson in The Great Gatsby by Francis Scott Fitzgerald. Think of Anna Karenina and Vronsky in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. Think of Florentino Ariso and Fermina Dasso in Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Or come here. Come think about Devdas and Paro in Devdas by Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyaya. Or think of Binodini and Mahendra in Chokar Bali uh, by our one and only Rabindranath Tagore. Or why can't we have real life characters too? We have John Keats and Fanny Brown, that those amazing lovers who were kind of immortalized in that beautiful sonnet by John Keats. Or think about the real life love affair between Amrita Preetham and Sahir Luthyanvi. It's a beautiful tale. Sahir Luthyanvi, the music maestro, and Amrita Preetham, the renowned novelist writer, they fell in love, but their love lived only in poems, only in letters, only in silences, only in longing that was never communicated. My dear friends, Adhuri Kahani, incomplete stories. However, Adhuri Kahani is not only about unfulfilled romance, it is also it is also the eternal echo of what could have been. Had this been like this, had it not happened like this, what could have been? It is a desire, it is a literary longing. In Derridian terms, it is a trace, an affective presence even in absence. No, we are not with the person that we wanted to be, but then we are with the person that we wanted to be as well in some other ways. in our Adhuri Kahani. And what happens now is when we talk about these Adhuri Kahanis, when we talk about unheard melodies being sweeter than heard melodies, what also happens is we romanticize pain. We transform the personal into the poetic and allow love to become larger than life precisely because love is not fully materialized. We romanticize it, aestheticize it, and say that a love that doesn't consume it. This is what you read when you talk when you remember the affair between Amrita Preetham and Sahir Luthianvi. I was reading that Sahir Luthianvi didn't want a consummation of their love because he felt love is more beautiful when it is not consummated. Sahir Luthianvi. You know, so there is something romantic about it, no doubt, something aesthetic about it. But my dear friends, when we romanticize pain, there is a risk. There is a big problem here. And to explain this problem to you, let me just invite your attention to Jacques Derrida. He has written a wonderful essay in 1988, and the essay is titled The Laws of Reflection. The Laws of Reflection, Nelson Mandela, in Admiration. So I'm reading a paragraph from this particular essay by Derrida. Derrida is tough, I know, but this paragraph, I'm sure most of us would understand something at least about what he is trying to say. So in this 1988 essay, Derrida says, we must learn to live with ghosts in the upkeep, in the conversation, in the company or the companionship, in the commerce without commerce of ghosts. What is he basically saying? We must learn to live with ghosts. What is it? And this being with specters, being with ghosts, would also be, but not only, but also a politics. He says living with ghosts involves something political as well. What politics? He continues. The politics of memory, of inheritance, and of generations. The choice, therefore, no longer has to do with the confrontation between the right and the left. Think about it. You have a center. So the question is not between going to the right or to the left, but between those who want to romance the center. The question is, the choice is between those of us who want to fall in love with the center and those who know that we must stay with the ghosts. And some of us love to stay with the ghosts. What are ghosts? The marginal presences. So some of us want to go into the center and fall in love with the center, while some of us prefer to stay with the margins, to fall in love with the ghosts. And he concludes that paragraph thus: we must know that we must stay with the ghosts without romancing the margins. Now, this is the essence of what I am trying to say. I told you there is something problematic about romanticizing Hamari Adhuri Kahani. What is wrong? Derrida says we must do it without romancing the margins. In other words, deconstruction must be done without falling in love with the margins. In other words, deconstruction must be done without bringing the margin to the center and taking the center to the margin. I hope you're getting what I'm trying to say. So this is the quotation. So the point is, we must learn to live with ghosts without romancing the margins. Take a simple example. Women writers have traditionally been um, have traditionally been ignored and neglected in English literary canon. Suppose we are discussing this idea. Now, who are at the margins? The women writers, the writers during the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, those women writers are at the margins. Now, Derrida says we must learn to live with the ghosts. What is it? These women writers are ghosts because they are neither present nor absent, neither here nor there. They occupy a mestiza kind of consciousness. So what happens? They are ghosts. But Derrida doesn't say we must forget those ghosts. He says we must live with the ghosts. But how should we live with the ghosts? Without romanticizing them, without romanticizing those marginal characters. In other words, when we move something from the center, now if in this particular example, the male writers are at the center and female writers are at the margins. Man, center; woman, the ghostly marginal presence. Now, when we do deconstruction, when we do any kind of try to do justice to these women writers, we should never commit the error of removing man from the center and putting women writers into the center. Why? Because still again we are doing the same mistake. It doesn't matter whether man is at the center or woman is at the center. We don't want that kind of system. This is what Derrida wants. Derrida is a thinker who is deeply interested in deconstructing binaries like center, margin, self and the other, presence and the absence. And here he is clearly warning us against a simple reversal of binary logic. He is, basically telling us to go for an ethics of ontology. We have to love the idea of being with the ghostly, the marginal, the suppressed. Very good thing. There is nothing wrong with it. We have to be with the subalterns. We have to be with the marginal. We have to be with the oppressed and the suppressed and the voiceless. No question about it. But we should do that without romanticizing or fetishizing them. This is the point. I want to tell you two major aspects of what we just discussed. One, we should not invert binaries simplistically. No, it is not about putting somebody at the margins into the center and putting those at the center to the margins. It is not enough to abandon the center and romanticize margins as more pure or authentic or noble. That is still binary. We don't want that binary. That is why we are, this conference is about moving beyond binaries, because binary is not what we want. One thing. Secondly, Derrida wants us to remember that we should reject both glorifying the center and fetishizing the margin. We should not fall excessively in love with the center, nor should we fetishize, nor should we romanticize the margin. Oh, you are at the margin, extremely sad, but there is a strange beauty about being in the margins. No, that is also not the right way to do it. Derrida warns us that we must stay with the ghosts without romancing the margins. To merely invert the binary is not liberation. We are not liberating ghosts. It is just repetition. Repetition. Someone else becomes the ghost. What is the use? So we want to do away with this kind of thinking. So instead of inverting the binary, we should not we should actually think of something else. And that is where intersectional identity too demands an ethical gaze. We must not just think of intersectionality as a theory that we can study and where we can do a lot of PhD on. That is not our point. What we are trying to do is we have to understand that intersectional identity must also be understood with an ethical gaze, not with a pathetic gaze, not with a romantic gaze, but simply with an ethical gaze. And it should not come down to fashionable vocabulary. Now, how is an identity formed? Before moving further, let us be clear about how an identity is formed. And specifically, here I would like to invite your attention to the idea of affective identity. What is affective identity? In simple words, affective identity is the identity that we have because of our emotions. See, you can call it emotional identity. In some ways, affective identity is emotional identity, the identity of a person based on the emotion he or she has. But it is just not exactly emotions, it is something more than just emotions, because it involves two things. One, it involves bodily sensations, desires, silences, and longings. And two, it involves the social and political dimensions of emotions as well. Thus, in simple terms, affective identity is who you are based on how and what you feel. So, if you have an affective identity, you are asking questions like, what do I want? What is my desire? What do I want? What makes me sad? I'm thinking about feelings. What makes me angry? What does my body feel? What does my body remember? For example, somebody who loves you touch your hands. Now what happens is your body remembers that touch. We call it muscle. There are different ways of explaining it, but how this happens, what does my body remember? When we are talking about emotions in terms of memory, we are talking about affective identity. These feelings are not personal, they are shaped by cultural factors, they are politically charged and historically situated. And literature does not answer these questions. What do I desire? What is my desire? What do I hate? What do I love? What makes me sad? These are not questions answered by literature. What does literature do? Literature enacts these things. Every sigh of Virginia Woolf, every scream in Sylvia Plath, every silence in Toni Morrison is a theory of affective identity. Think of Hamlet. Hamlet's sadness, Hamlet's melancholy is not just an emotion, it is an affective identity that shapes his behavior, his alienation, and his philosophic outlook. So, why would affective identity matter to us? It matters because it reveals how, intersectional identities are not just socially assigned but felt in emotional and visceral ways. Affective identity resists the idea that identity is fixed. No, identity is not fixed. Instead, identity is fluid, embodied, and lived. And finally, affective identity highlights the politics of emotion. For example, two people are sad. One person's sadness is highlighted, while another person's sadness is forgotten. Whose grief is acknowledged, whose fear is legitimized, whose joy is celebrated. It's interesting. So, affective identity is where the self bleeds into the world. It is the melancholia of the queer child. It is the rage of the caste oppressed. It is the shame of the colonized. It is the love of the unspeakable. It is not what we are called, but what we feel in the marrow of our being. That is affective identity. My dear friends, I ask you just one question, a silent whisper to each scholar, each student, each teacher listening to me, you know, each wounded identity that is paying heed to me. My question is, what if your sorrow is not your sickness? What if your sorrow is your syntax? I'm asking you, what if your sorrow is not your syntax, not your sickness, but your syntax? What if your sorrow is your grammar? What will you do? If it is a part of you, if it is the essence of you, what can you do? If it is not a sickness, my dear friends, what is the problem? Derrida said we must stay with the ghosts without romancing the margins. The problem is the margins are extremely seductive, attractive. Let us confess it, let us accept it. Margins are seductive. It is not that the center is always beautiful. No, margins are extremely beautiful. Margins are very much seductive. They whisper, they bleed, they scream to be heard. And we, as good hearted scholars, as lovers of justice, as good human beings, as compassionate people, we wander towards those at the margins, like moths circling the flame of the forbidden. But think about it. What if this desire to rescue those from the margins, to reclaim them and represent them, is also a kind of violence? Now, what am I talking about? Rescuing somebody oppressed, how can that be a violence? My dear friends, there is such a situation. What if to romance the margin is to violate the integrity? And here comes the question, are we treating pain as a spectacle? Pain as a spectacle, pain as something celebrated. Think about the front page image when a tragedy happens, a national tragedy happens, the flight crashes. The picture that comes on the front page is never the crashed flight, but somebody crying, somebody's sorrow. Isn't it so? So why does that happen? Does it become a kind of spectacle? Should we take a selfie with a dying child who is dying of poverty and write a moving tribute in some national newspaper, or write a Scopus indexed article in a Web of Science journal about the menace of poverty? Is that what we should do? Or should we simply, you know, embrace that child who is dying of poverty and feed her? Isn't it what we are expected to do? Instead of romanticizing and fetishizing poverty, we should do something else. This is the point I'm trying to make. Intersectionality, thus, is not an invitation to beautify, romanticize, aestheticize suffering. No, it is not a masquerade of the oppressed. It is not curated for academic, referential, citational pleasure. No, not for us academics to talk and enjoy and write papers and produce a conference proceedings and stop there. Crocodile tears will not help. There is something violent about giving attention as well. When we romance the margins, what we also do is we are collapsing something. We make the marginal desirable, and by doing so we strip it of its danger. What am I saying? We reduce intersectionality to a stage. I'm talking about the actual research that is happening in our country today. Intersectionality is very interesting. So many people are interested in doing PhD and MPhil and MA thesis on intersectionality, intersectional identities. But what happens many a time in many such researches is that we reduce it to, for example, a person who talks about queer, speaks about queer as something quirky, something charming, something interesting, something unexpectedly beautiful. So you are forgetting its pain. You are doing the same thing that a boy does who takes a selfie with a dying dog instead of taking it to the hospital. When you say the queer is quirky, you are doing that. When you make the mad woman the muse, you are doing exactly the wrong thing. The mad woman should be treated rather than be celebrated as a muse. When you think of the oppressed as ornaments, as figures of speech to embellish your poetry, you are committing the sin. The radical pluralities of identities are flattened into narrative commodities, ready for citation, consumption, and academic applause. At the end of this presentation, we clap. But for whom? Should it be for the speaker? Should it be for the marginalized? If we clap for the marginalized, for what in them are we clapping? Are we like the colonizer who loved, within double quotes, who loved the native, the colonizer who loved the colonized? Are we like the anthropologist who admire the savage? Are we like the poets who wrote elegies for the mad and call it art and celebrate it in international events. The romance with the margin, however well intentioned it is, performs the same script as the center. It desires, it defines, and it dominates. Every time it happens. Whenever you are romancing the margin, you are making the mistake of dominating, controlling. You are doing what the center does, controlling, defining, and dominating. And that is why it is important for us to stay with ghosts. Derrida tells us to stay with the ghosts, but he doesn't tell us to kiss the ghosts. No. He says we should stay with the ghosts, not kiss the ghosts. We should try to sit with the specters of pain, not to choreograph their dances. You know, think of somebody who is dancing on a plate which is under which a fire is burning, an iron piece under which a fire is burning. So you think if you are able to enjoy that dance, you are a sadist. You are not an artist. You are a sadist. So that is the difference. We should not enjoy that dance. Rather, we should be able to, empathize and feel the pain with the margins. That is what intersectionality calls for. It is not about collecting categories, but about holding contradictions. So if we romance margins, intersectionality becomes a performance, a carnival of identities where everyone plays their roles, but no one is heard. It asks us to listen to dissonance without resolving it, to let pain speak without translating it into theories that make us appear intelligent. Okay, I have given a wonderful lecture. I have spoken about Derrida and Foucault and so many people. Now everybody is impressed that I am giving a beautiful lecture. No, that should not be the idea of my lecture. I should stay with grief without turning it into glamour. Otherwise, what will happen? The entire conference that we are doing will become an academic theater. We are saying, cite me, CIT, but don't see me, not SIGHT. Don't see me, but cite me. If that is your idea in talking about margins, you are romancing the margins, not trying to help them. Or if you are talking it with something like include me, but don't touch my scars, don't heal my wounds, then you are romanticizing the margins. If that is the case, intersection becomes intersectionless, a roundabout moving in round and round with no movement. You are back at the same place. You go in circle. You say that you traveled a lot of space, and but you are still at the same space at the end. What is the point? So going in circles will not help us, because there is no ultimate displacement, no actual movement, no friction, no fire. So what we need then? We need a poetics of refusal. When we talk about moving beyond binaries, we should move beyond the seduction of binaries. We should move towards solidarity with the margins. Let us not desire the margin like a forbidden lover. Let us dwell with it as a companion in anguish. You know, when your beloved faints in your hand, you are in love with a person, and that person falls unconscious and she or he faints into your hand. What you feel should not be romance. You should not think that, okay, this is like the Lady of Shalott, the dead Lady of Shalott in my arms. No, you are thinking, oh my God, this is my beloved. I should immediately try to bring her back to senses. That is where, and this same feeling should be the case if you are talking to somebody who you don't know. When somebody faints on the street, again, this is what we should feel. Not only when your beloved faints into your arms, not only when there is this, we have seen this meme when a boy says he cannot lift a gas cylinder, but he can lift his lady love who is 75 kg. The gas cylinder is only 25 kg, he cannot lift it, but his beloved is 75 kg, but still he can lift her and move round and round. That should not be the case. That is not the romance that we require. Let us not turn madness into metaphor, queerness into costume, caste into an opportunity for citation. Let us learn the ethics of proximity without being possessive. But let us learn to witness without wanting name or fame. Let us practice a new kind of love, a new kind of sensuality, not of erotic conquest, but of epistemic care. Let our approach be like that of a lover who does not touch without consent, romancing beyond margins. This is what we have to do. Like a lover who does not touch without permission, who does not decode every moan of his beloved, who does not turn pain into poetry without permission. That is the kind of poet we need. That is the kind of lover we need. That is the kind of lover and poet that we all are expected to be when we are talking about moving beyond binaries and when we are exploring intersectional identities. So, my dear friends, let us go beyond binaries, no problem. But we should do it not by turning the coin, not by flipping the coin, but by melting the coin. Otherwise, it will not help. If whether the head becomes the tail or the tail becomes the head, no difference. What we should do is we must melt the coin altogether. Let us go beyond intersection as a mere spectacle and enter intersection as a vast abyss where voices of pain and suffering echo against each other, where pain does not rhyme, and where no identity is ever complete. Because if we romance the margin, and concluding my session, if we romance the margin, what happens is the center remains untouched. The center may be shifted, the center may be disguised, the center may be renamed. But if we romance the margin, the center remains untouched. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak famously asked, can the subaltern speak? Did she answer the question? I think she hasn't answered the question. She just raised the question, can the subaltern speak? An answer that Spivak refused to give to her own question, can the subaltern speak? We can have the answer here. You and I can answer that question with an emphatic yes, because if we stay with whom? With ghosts. If we stay with the margins, with humility, with discomfort, with suffering, with listening, then perhaps the ghosts may finally speak, not for our pleasure, but for their own liberation. And that is when we succeed in moving beyond binaries in intersectional contexts. My dear friends, I hope I made some sense with whatever I was trying to say with ghosts and making ghosts speak and moving beyond binaries and boundaries and doing that without embracing, without romancing the margins. So I conclude my uh, discussion here. Um, Thank you for the opportunity, but definitely please feel free to ask any or in any number of questions. I will be happy to answer them to the best of my knowledge. So that's it. That is the lecture on Romance Beyond Binaries, Liberating the Ghosts of Intersectional Identities. Yeah, I can see that not many are online, but I can also see that so many of you are attending the session like offline in the hall. More than 330 people, I'm told. So we have a lot of people attending, which is wonderful. Please feel free to ask the question. I guess somebody would help you, those attending offline as well, to and ask your questions if you have any. I'm happy to answer all your questions, any and all of your questions. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your insights, Sree.
Thank you, sir. We had a wonderful session from you, and students have gained more knowledge regarding this topic. And I am very much thankful as a principal of this institution. I thank you once again, sir.
And thank